that has been wiped clean of pine, and everything that you see pushed up, they're going to come back and burn it and then replant. This is important that you stick together. You keep your interests together. You hold tight to your interests. And if you plan on doing anything with your interests, make sure you do it in the family. Keep it in the family. That's where we fell short. Because whatever they got from him now is probably gone. Just like everything else.
Hello everyone, King here back for another video. In this video I'm going to do a reaction to Vice News. Vice News channel on YouTube did a special on how property law is used to appropriate black land laws. I'm going to speak to this video based on my experience in dealing with heir property and try to preserve particular property for my family. So there's a lot of risk associated with that, so I think it's only fitting that I give a reaction to this video. I'm going to wait to the end to give my comments on it, so watch it entirely through the video, and then at the end I'll give my comments and my final thoughts. So let's get into this video.
There are a lot of great $600,000, $1 million, $2 million homes.
Your biggest decision is, do I want to go to the beach or the pool, and what am I going to grill for dinner? South Carolina, Hilton Head. What's going on there? People with families, everybody loves Hilton Head.
One of the best ways for an American family to create intergenerational wealth is to own some land. It's in high demand, and they don't make it anymore. I'm standing on the beach of the beautiful island of Hilton Head, South Carolina, where after the Civil War, black people owned most of this. But over the decades, the land was lost. And to this day, we have black folks that are still fighting to keep their little piece of the American dream. By 1910, African Americans owned around 16 million acres of land, much of it acquired through purchases and homesteading. But after years of violence, intimidation, and legal trickery, most of it was taken. Texas A&M law professor Thomas Mitchell has been tracking that loss for 2 decades.
Historically, we're talking about African Americans. Despite this incredible acquisition of land after the Civil War, most of that property was not considered prime real estate. For example, Hilton Head, South Carolina. Until 1950, Hilton Head was remote. There wasn't a bridge from the South Carolina mainland out to Hilton Head Island, and the island was owned by majority African Americans.
Right.
What does South Carolina do? They build a bridge. Real estate developers realize, oh, there's a great economic opportunity, and they have visions of what has become Hilton Head.
The indigo, rice, and
This is an extra large t-shirt that I
Well, my apologies for the
see is baggy.
long staple cotton of the
commercials, the
has
ads.
given way to the golf, tennis, and swimming of today's leisure society.
They started buying out individual families, and there's hardly any black landowners left. And what's just happened as our society has advanced, areas that were once considered the backwaters no longer are the backwaters.
We're on a mission right now. To get this tangerine. The vulnerability of black land isn't limited to the coastline. It's widespread throughout the United States, even in my hometown of Tallahassee. Sandra Thompson learned just how hard it can be to maintain possession of land that developers want to get their hands on. I remember growing up in Tallahassee. This was the stick. I went to school with people that lived out here. We'd be like, you live in the boonies, in the boondocks.
It's actually now zoned urban fringe.
Urban fringe.
Urban fringe.
People try to buy it.
All the time.
Sandra's family were sharecroppers on this land. Her grandparents bought it in 1946 using money their son made serving in the military. But their will didn't clearly identify a single person who would inherit and manage the property.
When my grandmother passed away, it was left equally to her descendants. So that essentially created heirs property.
Heirs property. On the most basic level, what is it?
Heirs property is communal type property where your ancestors would have purchased the land, and once they passed away, it transfers to the next generation and their descendants. It's fractional ownership. A property that could be owned by 200 people. Any one of those heirs could sell their percentage. That new owner can go to the court and say, well, we can't agree on how to manage this land.
And force the rest of the folk to sell it even if they don't want to?
Yes. And so it was essential for us to move it out of heirs property status. And in that process, costs from probate to title clearing close to about $10,000.
Wait, so you own the land, but then you had to pay $10,000 to own the land again?
Exactly. Because of the cost. A lot of families don't clear title to their property. And so then it keeps them in a vulnerable economic risk position.
African Americans disproportionately own heirs property that every lawyer who was knowledgeable about this ownership form would tell them, run away. Do not ever own it under this structure. And so you're having a population sitting in this very vulnerable way, and oftentimes in a way that they don't understand how the law operates, sometimes until a lawsuit is filed.
This land been in our family for at least 125 years. Started with my great-grandfather. The land is for me a lot of memories, part of my roots. I was proud of the name Lewis. We worked to have something. I guess we say we lost it.
The Lewis family owned 480 acres of land and a homestead in northern Louisiana. Because the land was heirs property, several distant family members were able to sell their share of it to a local timber developer named James Tuggle. Tuggle forced the sale of the land that happened last year.
My great-great-grandfather raised 13 kids where that house sits. I mean, there are so many heirs tied into the Lewis properties. It'll make your head spin. Taxes were always paid on time. We were under the impression that could no one person from the family just up and sell any part of the property without anyone being notified.
Do you all know the relatives that sold their part?
I've only seen one once.
You in New York, wherever, going on with your life, you don't really know nothing about it. But it's a little country spot right here. You don't know nothing about this here.
As part of the legal process, the forced sale of heirs property has to be publicly announced. In the Lewis's situation, a local newspaper posted a notice in the weeks leading up to the auction.
This is a small town. Okay, this is not like the Washington Post or New York Journal or whatever, you know. There's no paper out here in the country that's being delivered to the doorstep. You know, ain't no ball around, no bicycle throwing no paper on the front porch down here. So walk in and just do a family like that. I don't understand that. My mama keep the insurance on this house. She keep a roof on this house. She keep these bills paid on this house. You know, my thing is, this house has been here for years. Because of a technicality, you uprooted a family.
Shortly after James Tuggle completed the purchase of the Lewis property last year, the sheriff evicted Michael. So this is where your
My trailer was sitting here. Those are the steps to the front entrance. I called the sheriff. Well, it's his property. He can do with what he wants.
The sheriff saying that Tuggle can do what he wants.
He can do what he wants. It's his property. I suggest you move the trailer. He says, well, that's all I can tell you. Is there anything I can help you with? I told him no.
Michael ended up with a little over $2,800 for his share of the property. He used it to relocate his trailer home to a half-acre lot nearby.
Still got to put in a water line. The water line's across the road. I could be angry angry to the point that I want to do something to somebody. I mean, you're talking about 125 years of family heritage.
Michael invited us in to see the documents from the local district court that informed them their land was being targeted for sale.
This is a petition that came to us via the sheriff department. This is the very first document that we received.
You're hereby cited to comply with the demand contained in the petition, which office is in the town of Homer, said parish, that you have
There's a lot of
15
words
days after
thrown
this.
at somebody that really can't understand some of the lingo, so to speak. We get up to the office to find out exactly what it is that they're trying to say.
To make sense of these documents and get a better understanding of what happened to the Lewises, we visited the clerk of court, Brian Flynn.
Anything involving a partition lawsuit is filed here in this office. I'm the custodian of all of these records that you see. So you want to take this out in front?
Yeah, we take it out.
Apologies again for the commercials, for the ads.
When it comes to developers, what's the mechanism that they use to track down family members?
Okay, they'll come into this office, and then generally you know the piece of property that you're looking for. You know, whether that is because it's got some timber on it or something of that nature. Then what you do is you can look at the tax assessor's office, and the tax assessor's office will give you just a visual plat, a hand-drawn plat of how the property went from one person to the next person to the next person, and that's how they'll initially find out who owns the property.
So, what happened with the Lewises?
The Lewises are a family that is spread out across the United States. So James Terry Tuggle buys into that property. Now, he didn't just buy a sliver of that property. He ended up buying somewhere in the neighborhood of 20%.
Understood.
Once he owns that, he can force the entire thing to be sold,
And that's what he did.
which he did.
I smell it. Over the course of a decade, Tuggle, a timber developer in town, bought the shares of more than 20 people connected to the Lewis property, most of them from out of state. He declined our request for an interview and didn't respond to our written questions.
So the sale happens at the sheriff's office, where it is publicly open for bid, and it's sold for $555,000.
That bargain of a price, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know, $550,000.
For 500 acres?
Oh, I've seen 17 acres of land sold for $1,800, and believe me, that's disturbing.
The sale he's talking about was made in 2001 to a real estate investor named James Steele, who advertises his ability to force the sale of heirs' property. We caught up with him at a sheriff's auction nearby.
All right, suit number 41821 Tree Investments LLC versus Maurice Hunter et al. The minimum acceptable bid is $2,294.25. The floor is now open for bids. Do I hear a bid?
Bid cost.
Okay, $2,294.25. It's sold. Just put your name up there.
Morning, Jim.
Morning.
How you doing?
Fine.
What just happened today here?
Well, I bought an interest in a piece of land, an undivided interest, when it's inherited, there's a lot of heirs. I own 24 acres out of the 52.
Before the day you did.
Yes.
And now you came and purchased the rest. How much have you paid in total for 52 acres?
I would have to add that up, because don't get me wrong, I do a lot of these, and I can't keep them all in my head.
How does heirs property fit into your overall business model?
To be truthful with it, it's probably 90% of my business model. Even going back to the Civil War, we're doing something that the people in the Civil War had it. I mean, they were slaves, and they had it. And I've had other landowners come to me and say, well, would you file a lawsuit for me and do this? Because I don't want to be the bad guy. You be the bad guy because you already been the bad guy. You do this all the time. I'll be the bad guy.
You recognize that what you're doing is perceived.
You look at me as evil.
No, I don't know. No, I'm saying no. No, I don't. No. What I'm saying is to the family member that wants to sell, you're bringing the bank, you're bringing the money. To the family member that doesn't want to sell, you're evil.
Probably in their eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some people are sincere about not wanting to sell. They mean it. Most don't. Most say that, but they don't mean it. They just want instant gratification and money now. But there are some that don't want to sell, and it's usually the ones that live on the property that are getting free rent, free everything.
It's their land. That's not free rent.
Well, they only own a minuscule portion of it. I've heard it thousands of times. You can't make me sell my land. And then I respond back. I say, yes, I can.
But it's my land.
Well, it used to be.
That ain't real.
The bottom line is what you have is these families who many times own property for generations, including families who acquired ownership right after the end of the Civil War. Their property rights are instantaneously extinguished, and then they are stripped of a significant amount of their overall wealth, not just their real estate wealth, because African Americans disproportionately who have assets, it's represented in land and homes. So their single greatest asset now has been sold at a fire sale, and they're getting pennies on the dollar.
The way that this system is set up, it seems like it disproportionately affects African Americans who, through legal trickery and threats of violence and lynching and whatnot, land has been taken from them.
Well,
You see what I'm saying?
I hadn't lynched anybody like this. but and, you know, and people like me, I'm at least nefarious. I'm an opportunist. I'm a racist. I've been called everything in the world. No, I'm not a racist. I don't go after certain things just because you're black or you're Asian or you what.
You going after the
land. So if everybody in the world could sell a piece of land to their brother or their sister or their son, and nobody could build factories, nobody could do anything. It would always be out of commerce and never be able to use. There's no remedy to get it back into commerce. And
Do you think it's fair?
it has to be. It has to be fair.
Jim Steele wasn't involved in the forced sale of the Lewis property. James Tuggle, the developer who was, let Greg stay on the land, but his mother decided to leave.
This is my mother's house. When she retired, this became her home.
Why did she leave it?
She left here because she was nervous about whether or not her mama's house was going to be pushed down and whether or not her house was going to be next. She couldn't sleep at night. She just didn't feel safe.
Greg's mother, Miss Trudy Stanley, and other members of the Lewis family tried to formalize their ownership when they found out it was being targeted for sale. Mr. Tuggle was years ahead of them in the process and outbid them during last year's auction. Shortly after that, Miss Stanley moved in with her daughter in Washington, D.C.
It's painful to realize that I don't have it anymore. It's not right. I didn't say I'm not part of the property. Only someone else came, sold their part, so they affect the whole family. We didn't know the law, so we could protect it, so we lost it like that. Every year, we paid the taxes. We didn't just leave it alone to forget it. We took our resources and made sure we got the taxes paid. And everything that we did.
Why do you think your grandfather didn't make a will?
Well, I don't think back then they weren't thinking about making a will. But my grandparents prepared for what he knew at the time. And what he had to do at the time. Prepare for my family. So I know it's different. Because you need a will. There was going to be chaos in their families.
How important was the land to you?
420 acres of land. It means a lot. And to lose it,
And using a professional
Again,
announcer
apologize for the
just
commercials.
hasn't been worth it. So that's why I switched to Sunday.
you had no defense, you know what to do, you lost it. That was devastating. Still is. It will ever, forever be that way. Because that's the law.
Part of the reason we have in the African American community such a high incidence of heirs property is that when African Americans moved from the status of being property themselves to after the Civil War, being able to become landowners,
Right.
hardly any of these families were able to structure the ownership in a way that would be stable because most African American families had no access to attorneys. And there's studies in various southern states that show that it's somewhere between 10 and 40% of all property African Americans own is heirs property, because a huge percentage of these families don't have wills or estate plans, and what they know is their property transfers to their heirs. There's a huge racial will making or estate planning gap. Average white family has 10 times the assets of the average black families. Real estate developers or speculators or investors, they know that. And so what they do is they give a lowball price because they know that the family can't even compete against the lowball price.
According to United States Forest Service research, there's around $28 billion worth of heirs property in the South, and that's a conservative estimate. Thomas Mitchell drafted legislation designed to help families hold on to theirs. So far, it's passed in 16 states.
So the first provision is if somebody files one of these lawsuits and requests a court to order the forced sale of the property, what the other owners are then entitled to is to buy out the person who asked for the forced sale. There had been this narrative that black landowners were inevitably going to be extinct by about now. I was like, why are we going to sit back and watch more and more property and land and homes go, and then on the back end call for reparations, as opposed to trying to stabilize the ownership so that it's not dissipated 20 or 30 years from now.
My family homesteaded these properties. They raised families on these properties. Mr. Tuggle, he ain't gonna build nothing on it. It's all for the timber. All for the timber. Far as you can see on all these hills, this is fresh cut. I mean, right after he purchased, he went to cutting. It was in the family for 125 years.
All of this.
All of this. My aunts and uncles' houses sat up on the top up here. You can see that it's been wiped clean of pine, and everything that you see pushed up, they're going to come back and burn it and then replant. This is important that you stick together. You keep your interests together. You hold tight to your interests. And if you plan on doing anything with your interests, make sure you do it in the family. Keep it in the family. And that's where we fell short. Because whatever they got from him now is probably gone. Just like everything else.
Wow, that's a very deep documentary on how blacks lost their land due to the law and their inability to not have access to information, to the law, to wills, to understand that the gentleman said where blacks went from being property, from slaves to owning property, and they worked the land together with other blacks who bought into the property, whether it be their family members or their kinfolk or people they knew when they were slaves. As slaves, it all made sense at the time, but the lady said it in the beginning. They were left in a vulnerable situation because it became heirs property, and they didn't have no wills naming who their heirs were. The fractioning of ownership is an issue, and that's how Mr. Tully and Mr. Steele and the other men and women or corporation organizations, land developers, were able to purchase heir property because of the fighting or the lack of legal standing dealing with heir property. And that's why I got involved. Now, before I got involved, members of my family knew, what was going on. If you've seen my other videos where I talk about why I fight for the property, I talked about Simon Cox. There was an article done on him. He was interviewed in December of 1974, where he talked about how he wished his father and other men and women didn't buy the property together because he created nothing but a mess. He said it that the generation didn't respect how things used to be or respect how things should be. They didn't think of the right things. They didn't do things the right way. We're chasing the almighty dollar. They care about having a drop of a liquor or a drop of drink, whiskey, whatever. So it wasn't the same. And he worried about the property. He worried about the property being lost. His daughter said that, which was one of my, I believe it was my great aunt. Because Papa Sim had 3 children, as far as I know, $3, and based on my family tree, and my great grandmother was one of them, Goldie Cox. Well, she had my grandmother, Hattie James, or Hattie Brown was her name, married name, and then she married my grandfather and got the name James. So I'm an heir on both sides of the family tree, on the James side and the Cox side. But it's unfortunate. There's laws out there to acquire land. There's laws out there to protect it. It was mentioned about the Uniform Heir Property Partition Act. Within that act is, the heirs that have brought the petition to the court to sell it, right? The other heirs have first rights, first dibs to, have the opportunity to buy out their share. And South Carolina has that same act, that same law that was signed in 2017 by Governor Haley before she left office. And it's unfortunate that they lost over 400 some acres of land that's been in their family for 125 years. Now, me and my family, the land that's in my family is, the multiple heirs property, it's been since, started in 1872 and ended in 1898, where the last tract of land was purchased. So, do the math. That's well over 125 years. Well over 125 years. The land has been intact, right? No one acquired this land. No one was able to purchase this land for whatever reason. But I'm trying to save and protect it, and members of the family don't understand and don't agree with the way things are going. Will they agree if it was Mr. Tully or Mr. Steele or somebody who specialized in acquiring heir property came knocking on the door and said, I'm going to buy your land, or I'm going to force to sell it because I got 20% of ownership? What are they going to do? The gentleman said that they uprooted members of his family based on a technicality. It would be the same thing. It would be no different if members of my family and others who live in the land and have rights to the land found out in the letter that, oh, we're going to take this land from y'all. We're going to sell it at the auction. I'm going to buy it at the auction. I'm going to sell it at the auction. What are they going to do? They saw that the lady and her people, her kinfolk, came together and tried to outbid him, but they came up short. They came up short. And what were they going to do? Imagine if they would have came together and hired a lawyer to get it and move it from heirs property into and organize it and sustain it to where now, okay, now they've got that cleared up, the legal side of things cleared up, let's move on, let's figure out a way to make these work. And Mr. Steele, who was at the sheriff's office bidding on that property, and he paid just under $3,000 for whatever acreage of property he bought. He talked about how he was a bad guy. And he was hired through other members of the family who were heirs to property to sell the land, to force it to sell because they didn't want to be viewed as a bad guy. But yet here I am, I'm a bad guy because I brought it to court to acquire the title, to identify who the heirs are, to move it out of heirs property, to protect it, to preserve it, to prevent people like Mr. Steele and Mr. Tully and whoever else, land developers, from acquiring the land, from partitioning and selling it, or buying up shares to where when they own 20% or 25% or 50%, they can do what they want with it. And it's unfortunate, but it needed to happen. And I'm still fighting for the property. I'm still fighting to do what's right, regardless of what my family thinks and feel about me. You know, it needs to be done, otherwise, leaving it in heirs property, there's risk associated with it. I'm not here to steal land. It's not for me. You know, watching James and Toby Cox and other men and women, they had a vision. They bought that land together for a reason. And if people, members of my family and others who, you know, understood that, we won't be in this boat. Otherwise, we might end up like the Lewises and others that lost their land here in South Carolina and Florida and Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi. You know, like the Gullah Geechees out there in Hilton Head or in Charleston. You know, I went to Charleston. I've been there 3 times now. This last time I purchased this book here. You know, the Gullah Days is written by these individuals in the back here. I guess they're ancestors or they're just descendants of the Gullah Geechees, the Africans that were on the island at the turn of the Civil War, beginning of the Civil War. And Hilton Head was predominantly black. You know, there was, you know, most of the white landowners didn't live in Hilton Head. They lived off the island. You know, so there was a lot of plantations. So after or during the Civil War and after the Civil War, when the blacks were freed, the slaves were freed, they stayed there and they lived there until the bridge was built in 1950, and land developers came rushing in and acquired up all the land. So again, it was only fitting that I react to this video and give my commentary on it. You know, there's laws out there that are used to, you know, legalize theft, as Mr. Walden said from the Centenarial's property, legalize theft, to acquire land, to steal land, the use of the laws. But there's also laws out there to protect it. And it's important that, you know, individuals who own their property, whether they're black, white, Asian, whoever, whatever, to understand the rules and laws and how to best protect them protect the property by using the rules and laws, by having wills, to building your family tree, to coming together, as the gentleman said, come together, hold tight, stand fast. Because on that shirt, on the Lewis's reunion shirt, it talked about united we stand, divided we fall. And if people ain't doing right, you know, people can be tired of the infighting and disagreements and lack thereof, and what are you going to do? But I'm leaving it at that. I appreciate you for watching, staying with the video. Hopefully you like this video. If you do, give it a thumbs up, share it, and leave a comment. Thanks, and take care, and God bless.